Okay, so going in a little different direction now. One person was wondering how many instances where a miscarriage has occurred does the soul of the infant actually enter the body, or does it wait to see if the body is viable? For instance, her mother miscarried before her birth and before her sister's birth. Were those other instances two distinct soul identities, or were they simply she and her sister waiting for viable bodies?
In a sense, yes, the second idea, but most souls either do wait until the body is viable, or they may dip in to have a certain experience temporarily and then leave. The idea in general is that most souls don't really fully connect to the idea of a new infant until just before birth. They may dip in and out during that time, but they don't really fully commit, and maybe not even for a few years even after birth. Hence the idea of what you call crib death, with no discernible reason. So the idea is that for the most part, most souls do not really commit or connect to a body until just before birth, in general.
Okay, and when you were mentioning that about crib death, they've found that when babies are sleeping with another human being, it helps to regulate their breath, and that can be a preventative for crib death. Is that related to what you're saying there too? I mean, how
Yes, to some degree, because again, there are agreements that are made that will allow the child to function in the way it needs to function in physical reality, and that may attract an adult to work with the child either through breath or other methodologies to allow the child to really cross the bridge from non-physical into physical reality in a way that it can thrive. So it just depends upon the themes of exploration and the agreements that have been made.
okay. Um, when a person crosses over into spirit, can you clarify if it's the personality that continues to exist for eternity, or is there some specific, like from one specific life, or does that
There will
being
Yes, there will
distant?
always be a part of that that continues to exist that is representative of the experience of a specific life. Again, similar in analogy to the idea that there will always be knowledge and experience within you from your childhood, even though you're not a child anymore. It never goes away, it's always there and always can be tapped into. So the idea of having a life experience is something that is then simply part of the soul itself. You can simply say the spirit is the specific representation or symbol or reflection of the life experience, and that becomes part of the soul and is always accessible. So, yes, it always remains, even though the soul may be bigger and greater, and the oversoul even bigger and greater than that. You never lose anything, and that particular aspect of the being can always be accessed and tapped into from many different sources, including the physical person who may need to interact with that aspect of the greater soul to recognize the being and recognize the person they knew in life. So it's always there. It just becomes part of something bigger, in the same way that your childhood became part of something more experienced as an adult.
And how does that relate to the idea of the independent frames that actually have no motion, and it's the projection of consciousness through them that creates the ongoing time experience with it? How
Well,
does
yes,
that
but now
relate?
you're talking simply about a mechanism by which you have a certain kind of physical experience. What is it you're attempting to relate to what we talked about previously?
In spirit, when the personality is still exists, but it's no longer is it
Yes.
living as a spirit, or is it
Everything
was
exists at once, remember? In that sense,
Mhm.
the spirit, the personality, the physical being all exist at the same time and can be accessed by the soul from any number of directions. So the idea is that there are frames on every level except the one. Every level, because as soon as there is any experience of division at all, as soon as there's any experience of an other than yourself, then there are frames by definition. It's just that the experience of time and space in those frames is different from level to level.
I don't know who thought this up, but it's pretty amazing.
It just is the nature and structure of existence itself in the way that it must function by definition.
Um, Many people have negative experiences when studying, especially in Asia, this individual is saying. Studying sometimes becomes torture, and children are taught to accept that as their fate. Why do people have a belief that we have to study hard and memorize and to grasp knowledge and technology? How do we free people from this unnatural way of studying? And perhaps you could also share some other ways that we can study so that it's not like that.
All right. Well, we have actually explained this many times, but the reason that it seems ensconced in your society to memorize things comes from long ago when you were hunter gatherers and you needed to memorize certain kinds of hunting paths, certain kinds of places where there might be danger, where there might be food, where you could be taught to understand how to do things in a certain way and memorize those things for your own safety and for your ability to thrive. And it's simply been handed down through the generations for thousands of years that memorizing things like that would actually be to your benefit. And to some degree, it can be. But as we have explained several times, the idea of actually creating scenarios in which you can experience things directly, what you may euphemistically refer to as learning on the job, is actually the better way to learn something and instill it within yourselves, because as long as what it is you are needing to learn to thrive in physical reality is adapted to what you are really passionate about, you will retain it. And in fact, you will become excited about learning and you'll absorb information very readily and retain it very readily because it's based on the idea of being taught to you through the auspices of your passion and what excites you, rather than simply suppressing your excitement to learn something in a way that isn't necessarily representative of your passion. So, creating simulations, experiences that are interactive and immersive, and teaching you the things that are important in your society that way is what will allow you to have fun doing it and retain it because you're doing it in the way that you're already excited to learn, by opening up your passion in ways that make it relatable to learn the things that you really need to learn and to know the difference between the things you actually do need to learn and the things you don't need to learn.
So just accepting the idea that we'll need to know what we need to know when we need to know it, as is true for your existence, that can be very natural for us eventually.
Yes, eventually, when you actually learn to rely on pure synchronism. But until then, you can practice the idea of creating imaginary and creative, immersive experiences that allow you to have experiences in a safe way that will teach you what you really need to know to thrive in physical reality without compressing your passion into a box.
And what is the difference between insisting on something and knowing something?
When you know something, you will know the difference between the two. Because insistence still carries with it the idea that you don't actually believe in it yourself. You don't actually know it yourself. You're actually trying to convince yourself of something that may or may not be relative to you. So the idea of knowing is just something that is absolutely known by you, as if it is something that you breathe, something that is part of you, something that you know is true and in alignment with who and what you are and what your relationship to existence is. Insistence implies that you don't really buy into the power of the thing you're insisting about. You're not really convinced yourself.
What about when a person feels angry at something that is said to them? Um, how can you manage that anger?
By understanding that what is said to them has nothing to do with them, if that in case is the fact. So the idea, again, as we have given an analogy, is as if a total stranger has come up to you and said something. You don't react because you know that they know nothing about you, and therefore what they're saying to you has more to do with their issues and their processes than it has to do with you. They're just using you as a sounding board, projecting their issues onto you. And you know this, so there's no reason to react. Now, you can always look at the advice or the sayings that someone gives you and say, well, is there something here for me? Is there something I need to know about myself that would help me to benefit from and change? But if you understand that what they're saying has nothing to do with you, then why would you react? So you have to look at your own beliefs about why you believe what they're saying is true.
And what's the connection between anger and grief?
Well, again, both to some degree are judgments of a sort that assume certain things that may not be so. So the idea of grief is, again, the definition that something has been lost and you are going into a state of being abandoned, of feeling abandoned in that sense, whether it is true abandonment or not. The idea of anger can be, again, based on your expectations of what you insisted should be and not allowing what is to be what needs to be. So they're loosely connected. And the idea is one is a reaction mostly to things that were insisted on by you, and the other is a reaction to the concept that you have lost something, when in fact no loss has actually happened if you open up your senses to the fact that things have simply shifted into a different form.
And that translates into a different attitude about change and things that come and go in physical reality because physical reality is a projection of consciousness.
And a temporary one at that.
So, is that sort of our maturation process to understand the nature of the reality that we're in and be more accepting of the coming and going and not suffer so much when we lose an individual, so to speak, or
Yes.
recognize it in a different way?
Yes, but even more so, it's recognizing the nature of the reality that's in you, because you're not in physical reality. It's in you. It's a projection of your consciousness. And when we say projection, we don't even really mean that it is projected outside of you. It's all happening within you. There is no outside. There is no outside. It's all happening in your consciousness, all of it. So it's the reality that's in you.
And this person is saying that sometimes they have negative thoughts and everything, and they get really scared that it's going to manifest. And they just get more and more fearful because they're having negative thoughts and they're afraid they're
All
going to
right.
attract it or manifest it. So, how
All
can
right.
we work with that?
All right. Well, you understand it's the fear itself that might attract it, not having the negative idea or perspective. Are they in any way, shape, or form concerned that if they have a positive thought, it might manifest when I don't want it to? It's the same thing. Just having the perspective, just having the observation, just having the awareness that there are thoughts that might be negative isn't enough to manifest them. You have to be afraid that they'll manifest. You have to believe in your belief system that they will manifest, that it's the most likely thing that will happen. But why believe that? Just having the observational thought isn't enough energy to make it manifest unless you're really, truly invested in it doing so. And having deep fear that it might manifest is having a deep investment that you are going to attract it as the most likely scenario. So just look at the idea of positive thoughts. You don't have the same reaction to those. It's equal to the idea of negative thoughts. They're just observations, they're just considerations, they're just thoughts. Remember that as you expand your consciousness, you become more aware of the negative and the positive, not less aware. You experience things less when you don't choose them, but it doesn't mean you're not aware that they're there as choices. You actually become more aware of them as choices, but just being aware that they're choices doesn't make them manifest. You have to invest in them deeply.
So, along those lines, if someone has phobia,
Yes.
can you address that idea of changing something like that? Like a negative thought is one thing, but having a very deep fear of
Yes.
some.
All right. Well, again, it can be approached in many different directions. For one thing, you can understand or ask yourself, what does this particular phobia symbolize for you? If it were to happen, what does it symbolize? Does it prevent you from doing something? Does it prevent you from looking within yourself to recognize something that the phobia symbolizes within you as a fear-based belief? What is the actual fear about? It's not usually about the thing itself that symbolizes the phobia. There's usually a deeper meaning. And if you're willing to investigate yourself, you'll usually figure it out. and realize that you don't have to be afraid of the symbol that reflects a fear-based belief within you. The symbol is just there to show you that you have this fear-based belief. So, for example, many times people say that they have a fear of heights. Many of them, although some of them might, don't actually have a fear of heights. They have a fear of falling, which means they have a fear of losing control, losing their balance. That's the issue. So if they understand it deeply enough, they can understand how to transform that, because then they can realize that if they simply continue to choose belief systems that allow them to remain in balance, if they believe they're worthy of that and deserving of that, then there is nothing to fear, really. They will always be stable, they will always be in balance, and the phobia itself, in that sense, can fade over time or quickly. But they have to understand the real deep-rooted reality of what it is they actually believe will happen in their core beliefs about why that phobia is bringing it to their attention.
What about like claustrophobia? A lot of people have that.
Well, again, it's about the idea of feeling trapped and limited by your belief systems. Trapped and limited in life, closed in, that you don't have the ability to expand, you don't have the ability to connect, you don't have the ability to reach out, you don't have the ability to see the light that is all around you. You are trapped by the idea that you are in darkness, in an enclosure that doesn't allow you to express your true self.
So when you come across these kinds of fears, what's the antidote thought process that describes how to deal with that? Or as you were
I
explaining
just gave it to you.
heights?
I just gave it to you. You have to understand what the phobia represents, and you have to get into the core fear belief about why you're holding on to that. How does it serve you to hold on to that? Look at the motivational mechanism. Remember, you don't choose to experience anything that you don't believe serves you. So if you have a fear-based belief that letting that phobia go will actually be the worst thing you can possibly do, that something even worse than the phobia will happen if you let it go, then you're going to hold on to that phobia because you believe that no matter how uncomfortable it may be, it keeps you safe from something even worse. But you have to have honest self-investigation to figure out what your belief system is telling you about that.
So in a sense, I'm thinking right now about like Natalie Wood, who in childhood almost drowned on a movie set, and then for the rest of her life had a fear of dark water. And then her life was ultimately ended in dark water. Is that what you're describing?
As a simplistic surface example, yes, but there may have been deeper reasons for that experience in her theme of exploration. You can't necessarily completely generalize it in that simplistic form for everyone. One person having that may have it on a very simple level, another person may have a much deeper reason for having those experiences.
Thank you. Yes, the last question then is it synchronicity that the James Webb Space Telescope looks so much like the Essassani crystal that you've described?
We will just leave you with a smile.
Okay.